Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning project management, production tracking, and media review platform for the creative industry. I've been using ftrack for the last 6 years, and it has helped me with all my visual effects projects. Forget about all the messy spreadsheets and the shared documents. ftrack is the best way to create a visual effects pipeline and to manage and communicate with your team and clients both locally and remotely. You can go to the video's description below for more information, or you can visit ftrack.com. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of VFX Notes. I'm Ian Fails, and I'm joined by Hugo Guerra. Hi Hugo, how are you? I'm sorry.
Very good. That was a good joke.
We are obviously talking today about No Time to Die, the latest Bond film, a film that I enjoyed immensely. And also, just to bring it up really quickly, felt that it was a huge invisible effects film. So that's going to govern a lot of our talk today. Hugo, have you got a really quick comment about the film before we dive into the visual effects?
Yes, I do. I mean, no disrespect to anyone, because I know everyone loves James Bond. I have never really liked James Bond. I've never really enjoyed James Bond. Even when I was younger, it was never really a big thing for me. And so, I enjoyed the film. The film is stunning and well filmed and well directed, and there's a lot of VFX, so it's really fascinating to watch. But I'll be honest, I haven't even watched the one before, so I wasn't really sure what was going on. I didn't watch the other, so I haven't watched. The only James Bond movie that I really like is Casino Royale. I find that film amazing and fascinating. And so I haven't watched any Bond. I then watched the one after, which is on the desert. I can't remember the name of it. Quantum of Solace, I think. I watched that one, and that was the film that really turned me off of watching anymore. So, no disrespect to anyone. I don't personally like it, but I know people love it. But I'm more than happy to talk about it because the film, my jaw dropped. The film looks amazing. It
looks amazing. And
it's
big.
Stunning.
It's big.
Oh, yeah, it's 3 hours long.
Yeah.
But
no, I meant the scope of it.
I know, I'm joking. I know. It's
awesome.
It's really big. So yeah, that I'll leave it to that. Let's jump in.
Yes, and right before we jump in, I just do want to say a big thank you first to our sponsors and to our Patreon supporters, both at Hugo's Patreon, at Hugo's Desk, and mine at Befores and Afters. If you're watching this as a Patreon, you're actually getting it 3 days earlier than everyone else. You're getting it ad-free, and, we love giving you that exclusive access. So thank you to our Patreon members and to our sponsors as well.
Yes,
right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, Hugo, is, of course, this film is Oscar nominated for the Visual Effects Oscar, which is pretty awesome.
The first James Bond nominated for like 30-something years, I believe.
Yeah.
Like it's been a long time since they've been nominated for the visual effects, but what a way to go. Because this one is it's big. Yeah.
That's true. You're hit very early in this film with visual effects. With the Matera sequence. Here we find Bond and Madeline in Matera, and I mean, this is kind of the scope of the film, isn't it, Hugo? I've watched it on the big screen, and it wasn't until I did some visual effects interviews that I realized how many visual effects are in this film. Even the wide establishing shots and some early shots in Matera are beautiful digital matte painting work, extensions, and enhancements of live action footage done by ILM. I really wonder whether any normal audience moviegoer would have noticed those establishes at all, Hugo. What do you think?
I don't think they would. And that's why I think this film is so fascinating. And of course I thought, yeah, of course, I'm sure some cars are CG. I'm sure some missiles are CG. Oh, I'm sure there's some face replacements. But then when I read your articles, I was just shocked. I was shocked because I don't think anyone realizes how much CG and how much mixing of practical with visual effects this film has. I think it's probably one of the biggest mixes I've seen in a long time. That entire sequence, like, you watch it and you're so gripped into the story, you're watching the action. There's not a single moment. That's why I'm saying I was surprised. There's not a single moment where you get turned out of the story. You know, sometimes when you're watching a film with a lot of VFX, there's always that weird shot that has a bit of too much glow or a weird camera angle or something that just puts you out a little bit and then you come back. There's not a single moment on this film that does that. And I think it's testament for the method that they've used here, because it's just being so strong in stunts, and some stunts are completely real, like the motorcycle, that's completely real, although it has augmentation to remove the ramp and this and that, but then other stunts are completely full CG. So this merge and mix, jumping from one shot to the other and one shot to the other, not alone, and also in IMAX, which is even more difficult. It's a stunning shot, stunning sequence. I went to see it again when I read your article. I went to see it again. Still can't see anything. Like I did not watch it on IMAX. I will be honest, I didn't. But I don't think I would see anything if I would watch it in IMAX. Probably most likely would even look better in IMAX. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to give an overview, apart from those environments we mentioned, there's, you know, a whole bunch of little mini chases in that sequence involving the Aston Martin DB5 and other vehicles as well. Sometimes that's a real car. Sometimes it's an augmented car. Sometimes it's completely digital. Sometimes it's the pod version with a stunt driver on top. Maybe the actors in it. Maybe they've got rid of the pod at the top. Very often it's been augmented to introduce bullet hits, and we'll talk a bit about those in a minute. I mean, one of the most amazing things that I was able to learn when I talked to ILM was that scene where Bond, he kind of cowers behind a stone so that a car will go over him.
Yeah.
I mean, safety-wise, it seems so obvious that should be a CG car.
Yeah.
But it is a CG car, at least for part of the shot, and then it's a real car for another part. You already mentioned it, but the mixing and matching is probably the real strength of that sequence, i.e. you never quite know how it's done, so you're drawn in to the sequence and you don't care about the visual effects, which is actually a good result, right?
It is, yeah. It's and also like the because, you know, shooting these in practical, of course, it should always be the first objective. It should always be the way that you should start a shot. Any VFX shot should always shoot it for real, and then see what you can take out of it. If you can keep some of it, good. If you can keep half of it, good. If you can't keep any of it, well, great reference you have. That's how you should always do it, and I think they took it to heart here. They shot as much as they could on this area, but there's so many. You just mentioned the pod, for example. For some people that don't know what that is, I'll leave a photo while we are talking about this. A pod is basically this kind of like metallic cabinet that is attached on top of cars. This is very common on stunt driving. I don't know if people are aware of this, but there's always a stunt driver driving somewhere on the car, and he can't be inside the car, otherwise you would have to remove him, and it's going to be too tricky for him to see the road. So he's normally on top or on the side or on another car, and even this is problematic because obviously this entire pod on top of the car distributes the weight in a different way because, of course, the car is now higher. So, of course, the car is going to curve differently. It's going to have certain swings that shouldn't probably be there. So, again, you have to then address those things and then have to tweak them. And also, not to mention this, I know it kind of sounds like simple. Oh, yeah, they just switched from CG to the real one. Well, There were, I think, according to your to a conversation you had, there were 10 of these cars, weren't they? There were 10 stunt cars, and they were built for this film, of course, with some little rigs and some extra stuff for safety. And they're all slightly different. These are Aston Martins. Normally, these cars are not all done the same. They are normally done on factories with a lot of manual work, just like a Ferrari and just like any supercar. And so when you really go deep into tracking a shot like this, and you go deep into compositing a shot like this, any little deviation between a car and the CG model will be noticeable by even if it's a few millimeters, especially if it's on IMAX. This must have been a struggle because the switching one to the other, they're never matching. There's probably like 5 different cars on one sequence. So they had to constantly tweak the CG car to kind of fill in and match the other cars that were all different. This is a mammoth task, and I'll give clap to the team. Like I could not believe what I was watching. Like I think this is, after reading your articles and after watching all of this, now I think this is a really big contender for the Oscar. If the people have watched these breakdowns, if the jury has watched these, I'm starting to think that Dune might not take it. I'm really certain Dune was going to take the Oscar. That was my feeling on this, but I don't know, man. This film is it ticks all the boxes. You know what I mean.
And that's only the car that we've talked about there. There are
There's like 10
convenient head replacements for some motorcycle shots. There are times when, they need to just extend Bond's leg as he gets off a motorcycle, things like that. I just love that invisible effects work, which is, it's just there to serve the story. It's not there necessarily to be flashy at all. And there's so much that goes into these car-to-car and car chase shots. We're talking about like the camera arrays that need to be filmed for backgrounds.
Yep.
We mentioned the bullet hits. This is a major part of the sequence when the DB5 does these donuts. Gets shot at first by the bad guys, and then does donuts. There's smoke that needs to be generated and to complement real smoke. There's bullet hits that need to be generated to complement, real panels that have been put into actual buildings in this ancient town or city, Matera. I just love that combination, again, saying that you don't really know which is which, and it's the whole point. It's the whole point.
Yeah. And I'm glad you've mentioned the tracks. We're going to go into the donuts and to the smoke and to the most obvious stuff, but there's a lot of things that are not that obvious. For example, this is an old city. Obviously, it's protected. It's like heritage place. You can't just go and shoot whatever you want on a place like this. I'm certain that they had enormous limitations of what they could really do on a place like this, as you always have. It's really, people need to really realize the amount of cleanup that this requires, because doing multiple takes and doing multiple setups, you'll have a lot of rubber on the floor, so you need to remove all that extra rubber because it's supposed to be the first time it passes through the city. It's not supposed to be multiple times. So you're replacing rubber that is on the track. You're replacing, you're adding bullet hits on every single wall and every single little nook and crack. Sometimes they hit the wall slightly, so there's like that generated debris and generated little part of CG augmentation to just have that little hit. This sequence is filled with hundreds and hundreds of little CG parts that are even not as obvious as that big one,
When I was watching the film and the bullet hits started, I was like, okay, I know that this is a continuity challenge for the filmmakers, for the editors, and the visual effects team, but I did not know how they were done. And after talking to ILM, I think I just have, again, a whole new appreciation for how meticulous this work was. Go to the article, check it out. It's just an incredible process that they followed, starting with stickers from the special effects team on the day to sort of generally get the placement of these bullet hits.
Yeah.
Then basically considering lots of different methodologies for how to do these bullet hits, both actually 3D and 2D, and simulation related, in Houdini, to get the right cracking and to just make it happen. But then also to deal with the continuity thing, because there's heaps of shots and you're seeing action outside the window and into the car as well. I think I really geeked out about the bullet hits, Hugo. It was actually probably one of my favorite effects in the film.
It was, yeah. Well, first of all, it's stunning, the whole thing. Like the sound of it's amazing as well. Like I shout out to the sound effects because that was such a nice sequence, especially when they're inside the car. But you're right. There is a mix of techniques here, because sometimes they did projection systems, projecting directly to the calcs because obviously, again, really great teamwork here with the effects department, because the effects department did break glass and they did have the calcs and they did had real stuff on set to know how this glass would actually break under this kind of pressure. And so the visual effects team took all of that and kind of worked backwards to try to build what it would look like. So, which is really fascinating because they were building simulations in Houdini to try to come up with the result of the decalcs instead of just making a simulation to make a break. They were trying to match what was shot on camera and what references they had, which is even harder than just doing whatever random simulation you want. So yeah, there was I guess it depended on shot to shot. On some shots, they did full simulation Houdini to do the break in the glass. Other shots, they just, but they did a projection system. Could have been done either in CG and also in Nuke and compositing as well as a normal standard projection system of UV projections on top of the glass, just like typically we do in cleanup and in other things. And then sometimes it was just a full glass replacement in CG. I mean, it really depends on the shot. The sequence is long. It's dozens of shots on that sequence. The job is seamless, and I'm glad you mentioned the continuity. People don't really realize how difficult that kind of thing is, because there's dozens of angles that you see this shot from, inside, outside, from the corner, from the back, from the top. Every single one of them, I bet that if you go in frame by frame on every single one of them, the bullet hits are exactly on the correct place. That's tough. That's really tough. And again, another reason people might be asking, why didn't they just shoot it for real? Well, first of all, yes, they could have tried shooting it for real, but then it would be too dangerous with the people inside the car, so they would have to put people there anyway. And also, if they would have shot it for real, they would not have the continuity. That would have been a tricky thing to maintain continuity with real glass shattering, unless you want to spend days shooting glass and replacing them every time you have a turnover. So another reason why visual effects is so instrumental on trying to kind of get these kind of action sequences off the ground. Would have been unthinkable to do a sequence like this a few years ago. Yeah. I think we reached the point now we can kind of do this thing and not even notice that it's CG, So it's fascinating.
And as you mentioned, a really great crossover between all the departments. ILM doing the visual effects here. The special effects supervisor, Chris Corbold, he's done 1 billion Bond films. Yeah, something 15.
He's a legend, man. He's a legend. He's cool. On all the behind the scenes on all of the films almost. A
quick plug here. He's actually in my Then and Now track at FMX this year, talking about this film and others. So that's really cool. Oh, that's awesome. And then there are the stunt coordinators and many other departments on the film. One quick thing before we leave Matera, Hugo, is ILM mentioned an interesting challenge they had for some of the chase plates in Matera because they were shot on IMAX.
Yeah.
And because it's this old city with cobblestones and they're shooting it on a camera car and they're basically getting vibrations on these huge IMAX film plates. And they were finding, when they were tracking the plates and match moving and working on them, I think they were getting these sort of subframe vibrations where one part of the frame, IMAX frame, looked fine and the other part, had that motion blur. They told me, but I don't quite know what ILM did to make it work. But they totally nailed it. I didn't notice that as a problem, but isn't that an interesting thing that they had to come up with?
My God, what a geeky moment. That article, that interview is fascinating. No, the problem here is that this is not digital and it's film. There is several problems here that happen on such a large sensor. The sensor is enormous because it's an IMAX sensor. It's like 7 centimeters or something like that. And so you have 3 areas of vibration, I would assume, maybe even more than 3. You have the camera itself because it's rigged on a car or whatever rig that it has, together with the top cobblestones. So that's one vibration moment. Then you have the second vibration moment, which is from the celluloids, the actual film passing through the machine. So that's another part. And then, of course, you have the rig itself with so vibrations of the car, vibrations of the floor, and then vibrations of the actual millimeter celluloid passing through the camera. So it's 3 different parts. It's almost like the problem we have in digital with banding effect, with rolling shutter effect. It's similar because in rolling shutter, sometimes the top would preview faster than the bottom. It gives you this kind of cutting in the middle, especially when you pan real quick. Obviously, this doesn't do that normally, but this level of vibration is too much. So it was amazing to read how, you're right, they don't explain how they fixed it. I don't think they would want to say how they really fixed it. But they had to come up with a solution to actually, they were considering tracking on subpixel, which is tough because they didn't shoot in high speed on all the shots, so you can't really track to that level. So I guess they would have to interpolate in event frames to try to track subpixel tracking data. And again, when everything fails, you just have to nudge it by hand. I'm sure they had to do that as well to try to match everything, because that's normally always the approach. You track everything, you do it as best as you can. If it all fails, you start to then start massaging the thing frame by frame. It's I haven't even thought of this problem ever. I guess because I never really shot something on a cobblestone on the middle of Italy with an IMAX and a rig like this. I never really experienced such a shake. But it makes perfect sense now that I've read the article. It makes perfect sense that it would have been an issue. I guess that I'm sure that in hindsight, they probably, next time they come across this, they might think that maybe they need to stabilize the camera a bit better, or they might need to put it on a different rig and then add the shake. That's normal. That's very common. We just recently discussed that on an episode when we were discussing a Twister, where they had to add shake on top because they couldn't track it because the shake was too much. So that's normally the process. But I am certain they probably discovered some of it after. I could be wrong, but it kind of sounds to me that this was something they found when they started really, really going deep into the shot. Yeah, man, I'll never forget it. Sub-frame tracking. Let's that sink in. It's just like,
love it.
My God.
Love it. Let's leave Matera and head to Cuba, Hugo. And this wasn't a huge visual effects sequence at all. We're talking about where Bond meets Paloma, the agent. And I think we wanted to mention... Pardon?
Funniest part of the film, really. It's really the funniest part of the film. For me,
it is a funny part of the film. Yeah. I guess what I liked here was that when we got to a bit of a fight and a chase, it felt like they'd really used some major set builds very well and just done some very traditional set extensions that are seamless. I don't think, again, anyone would have noticed what they were. But then there's a sort of fun part of this sequence, which is it's included in some DNeg breakdowns, which is just like they do on many fight sequences involving stunties but also actors, to make sure they connect punches and kicks. occasionally Paloma's legs are replaced and extended, and it's quite a fun thing to see in the breakdown, isn't it, Hugo?
It is. Well, first of all, that sequence is fascinating because you really don't expect it. Like, this is the stunt done by Maria de Armas, I believe that's her name, the actress. And it's funny because we've seen her before on a really big VFX on Blade Runner, and now she's again on another VFX scene. That fight sequence is beautiful. First of all, props to the stunts coordination and also the stunt, because they actually fought, and the fight is pretty real, and it's really orchestrated really well, and it's a beautiful choreography as well.
And she's got a crazy dress, right? Like, how the hell does she fight in that?
And also she's in pumps as well. She has like high heels as well, and it's like I don't even know how she can even do what the stuff that she did. But you're right. There's a gigantic level of invisible visual effects, because normally in the past, when we didn't have visual effects to this level, they would like trick you by cutting or by using angles to look like it connected, like by using an angle from the side or cutting right at the moment and then have a close-up of the hit. This is like wide shot of her hitting these guardsmen with open legs, hitting them on one side to the other, with no cuts. And so of course they had to like do that extra centimeters that were missing of her hitting with, of course she couldn't hit with the leg, otherwise she would have really hurt them out. Especially with those pumps. But yeah, no, it's an amazing sequence. There's so much there, and I think the breakdown from DNeg, I don't think it shows the whole picture there. I feel like there's a lot of sequences where they had to tweak the connection points. We only see one breakdown there. But yeah, that entire part, man, I love the CG on this entire sequence, because even as simple as even when Bond shows up on the harbor, you don't even think about it. Like, he's on a harbor. Yeah, okay, he's there. And then suddenly when you see the breakdown, the entire hill was replaced. The entire thing is additional matte painting with CG to make it look like they're actually on that city in Cuba instead of like, I don't know where they actually shot it, but that happens all the time, even on the main street where they are having the shootout, and the whole building is set there. They've built the entire set, but then the clock tower is CG, and then the buildings on the back are CG. There's enormous green screens and blue screens on the background that they've replaced to augment and continue the hallway, and to continue the rest of the streets on the back. It's a fascinating sequence, completely invisible, and very funny. Yeah, no, sorry, I backtracked there for the externals, but yeah, that was a funny fight sequence, and it's a surprise on the film for sure for me. I thought it was one of the best parts.
It eventually leads Bond to the trawler, where, spoiler alert, he's double-crossed. And
it's a spy movie.
There's a couple of great action beats on this trawler. One, of course, is that there's a fight between him and an agent. ILM revealed to me in one of the articles that that was two stunties having the fight, and they did some very seamless face replacement work for Daniel Craig and the other actor. I mean, again, Hugo, if they didn't tell me, of course I wouldn't have realized. And that, again, just goes to the invisible effects nature of the film.
Yeah, we're gonna... This is becoming really like a theme of this podcast, really, I think. But it's just what's happening right now. We're reaching to a point that it's becoming more and more difficult for you to notice. Even people that are specialized on this, even people that do this for a living. I do this for a living, you do this for a living, and even we are now being fooled in like, oh, was it? Oh, I don't know. Was it not? It's reaching a point, and that entire sequence is really, I mean, I wasn't even thinking about it. I'll be honest. No. I was watching it and I was worried about Felix. I was like, oh my God, is he gonna die? Is he not gonna die? He's in the water. What is he gonna do now? They're like inside this boat. I don't think only the second time I watched the movie, I was then looking at the things, but first time I watched it, I didn't even thought about it. Literally didn't even thought about it.
Yeah.
which is something, which is something to say. Like I was quite surprised about it when I start seeing the breakdowns, and obviously you're watching it and you know that of course they must have done CG because it's a boat sinking in the sea, but it just looks seamless.
But
I think it has to do with camera angles. It has to do with. Remember, we talked so many times, Ian. It's shot design, right? It's all about shot design. Sorry, I didn't want to.
And so you're right. So there's a fight, the fisticuffs, and that's the face replacement. And then this trawler starts sinking with Bond and Felix caught in there. Incredibly, they built, as they do for often sinking sequences, this rig that allowed the actors to get in there, be underwater, and for the water to rise and also tilt. So there's the huge practical effects side to it. Then when we sort of get to moments where it's really listing, we're underwater, there's also fire, that's where DNeg's CG boat and water sims and fire sims come in. And as you say, Hugo, I thought they were just as seamless, even though they're much bigger visual effects shots.
Yeah. They are. It's testament. I mean, it's testament to the direction of this film. Like I think the director. I'm sure I'm gonna butcher his name, but I believe it's pronounced Fukuyama. I think that's the. Isn't it?
I'm just gonna say Carey.
Okay, Carey. Okay. It's testament to his work, and it's also to everyone involved. But I think he is directing this film in such a clean way and such a well-organized angle, the angles and the shot design, and also the DOP. Linus Sandgren, I'm a big fan of his work. He's done some amazing films. I love American Hustle. I love La La Land cinematography. I don't like the movie because I don't like musicals, but I do love the cinematography of La La Land. I don't like musicals. Let's not talk about that. But he is the DOP of one of my favorite films of the generation, which is First Man. He's an astonishing DOP, together with the direction from this direction from Carey as well, and then together, of course, with the 20,000 VFX crews that worked on this film. I just feel like this film, the shot design is all done in a practical. I don't know how to explain this. It's all done in a way that, okay, we're going to be underwater, and where we're going to put the camera. I know we keep saying this thing, but this is not easy. It's not easy for you to kind of think outside the box and not go to the visual effects as a rescue, because a lot of times films you see the script and said, this is an action scene. Okay, it just says action scene. And then they just invent whatever they want on CG. To actually be this grounded and to actually stop yourself and say, okay, no, we're not going to do that. Let's pretend that we went there and shot it for real. Where are we going to put the camera? What weight is the camera going to have? What is the speed of the camera? What is the angle? What lens are we going to use? What are we going to do? All these things, they're going to be exactly the same choice that we had on the shot before so that it all connects. I think this is testament to the economical methodology that they had on trying to just not do it safely, which is like, let's just do it in CG. No, they thought it through so well that's why I'm watching the shots and I don't think about them, because they seem like they are part of the film. You have the scene with Felix on the bar talking with Bond, and then right after you have the crawl sinking. They both look the same. You know what I mean? Like, I feel this is fascinating to see. We've seen this many times with Christopher Nolan's film, I know, and we've talked about it on the podcast, but I love that this is spreading. This is now spreading to all the other films, you know.
Maybe just a point here is that the overall visual effects supervisor is Charlie Noble.
Yeah.
And in this trawler shot, that was DNeg. And we have talked before, Hugo, about maybe DNeg in particular having had taken on so many of these invisible effects films. Charlie Noble as well has supervised, films like Captain Phillips or Green Zone.
Yeah.
And some of the Bourne films, I think.
Yeah.
Where I feel like that's just his thing, was invisible effects. And as you say, it's shot design, but it's also just, well, we've got this much practically, let's extend it where we need to. The other thing with that trawler shot, by the way, is that yes, the sinking and some of the surface fire shots are CG, but right before it starts sinking, the baddies blow it up and this plane flies away. As I understand it, that's a practical explosion on a real boat that Chris Corbould orchestrated, where they had to give the boat back. And so I'm like, what? That seems to me to be a perfect shot for CG. But anyway, a perfect scenario for CG, I mean.
But
Anyway,
I think that's
cool.
why the film works, like by, not that they did it in purpose, they didn't. They choose to do what they can to the shot when they have it. So, they weren't purposely doing one on CG, one on real, one on practical. Yeah. They went along as they went and did the best they could for each shot. But I think the mix really works because you just, I guess if there was a little small moment where you're going to be pulled out of the film because of some CG, it never happens because you constantly go back to the real stuff that was really filmed.
Yeah.
And this is how I wish that we continue. I hope that we go and move on to this future where we have a seamless team effort between effects, visual effects, DOP, direction, acting. Everything is just seamless. We're just part of filmmaking. Everything is just filmmaking. And there's no ominosity between it. There's no fight between it, or also no articles about like, this was all for real, this was all CG. I want to leave that, and we would just think about the shots themselves, and I hope we go back to have a future like that,
I guess I feel like the practitioners, people doing the work, they don't fight about it. They're just making the best shot.
Yeah.
It's only the other people on Twitter.
It's all Twitter's fault. It's all Twitter's fault, I know.
Hugo, it all keeps continuing in another big sequence that is a mix of practical and digital, possibly much more digital effects than people realize. This is the Land Rover Defender chase that takes place in Norway. Here,
does it?
Good point. The visual effects here are by Framestore. I should mention they also did what's effectively, I think, a prologue to the film. Which is
the ice. Yeah. But we can't talk about all. Apologies to everyone. We can't talk about everything because there is film is 3 hours long, and there's at least 20 sequences that I would love to geek out about, but we can't talk about all of them. So we skipped that one.
Yeah, this is an amazing chase that actually sort of happens out in the open within a creek bed and then into a misty forest. It's set in Norway, yes, but it was in fact mostly shot in Scotland, and then is it Salisbury? Is that how you say it, Hugo? Plain.
Yeah.
In the UK, which is just incredible, frankly, because shot in those places because it can be controlled, right? And then even then, still, of course, augmented to have a lot of, extensions, replacement of grass that they throw up. They don't throw up, they ruin basically by driving over all this grass. And then when they need to make crashes and moments a bit more hairy, well, you just replace the Land Rover and you do a crazy stunt with it. But you base it on a stunt that is done in Scotland or the UK. This is why I think it works.
Yeah, it does. Like, they went out and shot the whole thing. They did. Like, there's no denying it. They went on, shot the entire sequence, all the stunts they wanted to do, the jumps, just like they did on Italy on the other shots with the bikes and everything. And obviously there was moments that, shooting in Scotland is tough. Weather is a problem. Rain. They had problems with weather. They had problems with rain. They had a lot of problems with other things. And just like you mentioned, like, you have the mud trail, you have the constant problems of having to do resets and to actually go backwards. And so I don't think anyone is... I didn't realize this when I was watching it because I was just watching it, a chase sequence. But then, of course, when you start thinking more about it, then you start realizing, of course, it had to be almost CG. And it's not all CG. It's like really a mixed bag of things here. Sometimes they replace half of the shot because they have to like replace the whole floor because of the tracks and just like make that work better. Then, of course, the motorbikes are mostly CG, so they had to put those in. And sometimes they had to tweak the car because the car wasn't in the right place, so they had to put the car somewhere else. But on some shots, they kind of felt, well, let's just replace the car in CG because it's probably easier to just put it in CG than trying to match the bonnet with the wheels and with the CG car. There is like an enormous amount of augmentation and merging happening here, from the practical set to the CG environments to the CG cars, CG bikes, and then tracks and complete floor replacements. And I challenge anyone to tell me which is which, because you don't notice it at all.
You don't know. And here's another thing which you will hear many visual effects supervisors talk about, which is when you're shooting car-to-car stuff, interiors and through windshields and whatnot, you are at the mercy of the camera and film exposure. And so what I feel like Framestore did here was, whatever exposure they did get for the practical shoot, they matched in CG. Or in visual effects, I should really say. I shouldn't always refer to it as CG because, of course, it's a mix of all compositing and whatnot. And so because they had that reference of, how much the window gets blown out, that sort of thing, when they go and shoot Daniel Craig on green screen for an interior shot for a Norway scene, they know how to expose it. I think there are times looking back now in car chases where I feel like they're not quite right. And it's because they've just sort of guessed, you know, how
well, they're on the stage. They're on the stage. And even I'm sure someone would comment on the video saying, well, they could have done it on a volume or an LED on this and that. Still not really the same. Yes, you could probably do some of it, but I would still advise you to go out, shoot it for real, at least one shot, and then go to the volume and match to that one. Because the way a camera works in terms of exposure is very different, especially when you're inside the car, like with the DOP and the focus puller and everything. You're probably exposing to a pretty random thing. Sometimes you're exposing to the actor, sometimes you're exposing to the background. It depends on what the creative look you want to feel on that shot and what are you trying to convey, if you're conveying a silhouette or if you're conveying really seeing his face, or if you want something in between. Those are creative choices done on the set with the actors, with everyone there, and then they serve that exact shot that they're doing. If you just go to a set on a blue screen and try to shoot the exact same thing, you are obviously always going to expose to the actor's face because you don't have the rest there. You just have a blue screen. So it's an afterthought. You're like, oh, I'll expose to his face because we need to see him. So I think that shooting it for real just brings that creativity flow that you have when you're on set, where if you're on set, you will... Let me give you an example. Like you try a silhouette and you think, doesn't really work here. Let's overexpose it a bit because it's going to look cool with the glow hitting the dashboard or something. Those kind of like little decisions would never be made if you just went and shot it completely in green screen. And I guess it's funny that you said that because we talk about a lot at times on this podcast about the fact that people sometimes hate CG, they hate VFX, like all this conversation that mostly on Twitter, like you say. And I think it has to do with the fact that in the past we had this issue. If you look back, no disrespect, but if you look back, for example, at, even simple stuff like, the Star Wars trilogy, the episode 1, 2, and 3, which was predominantly filmed on a green screen set, which was very advanced technology for the time. But you look at the shots and they look weird. They don't look correctly exposed. They look like the windows are actually exposed to the same level to the actors, and there's just something off between it. It's almost like I would have wished that they would at least went on to a window to shoot it first and then went to the stage and lit it that way. So there's a lot to say about this, I think. Like this is the, I guess it's impressive how all the companies here on this film and all the VFX supervisors told you the same thing, all of them said.
Well, yeah, it is a Bond film. And they're known for going around the world and shooting. Like it's not out of the ordinary that this stuff gets filmed. But I know exactly what you mean.
And they were very lucky because this was just shot just before the pandemic. They were very lucky they could actually do it. And the same way like Tenet, they actually managed to actually go to locations, which was great.
Exactly. Yeah. One fun thing we should mention about this car chase and sequence in Norway is a tool that Framestore was using to get the right kind of suspension movement in the defenders. It's a tool that they call weight shift. That they actually also apply to their CG characters. It's an AI tool, as I understand it, and the whole point of it is a bit of automation, right? We don't want the animators having to deal with tire movements and suspension. If we know how that kind of is meant to look, we can plug it into this tool and again, Hugo, none of us noticed this, right?
No, of course not.
It just looks like two cars driving, and that's the whole point.
This was a fascinating discussion you had with Jonathan Falker, the VFX soup, on this sequence, because I love the moment that he's saying, I don't want to spend time discussing how a suspension works. I don't want to waste time having an argument about physics. Physics is physics. And I love that. I love that because it is true. A lot of times when we do things by hand, especially when we hand animate things, or because you can't really get a car and put it on a mocap shoot. It's not like a body, So a lot of times we spend a lot of times arguing, oh, this jump doesn't look good. Oh, this way the wheel drops doesn't look really right. It's all physics. If you had a real car and if you could actually shoot it for real, if you could, it would have behaved in a certain way. There's no way around it. It's gravity. And I love that they developed this AI tool because it just takes this out of the equation. Because the car is doing something that is supposed to happen for reality. And so there's no argument about the creative decision. Like, oh, should it jump more? Should it go deeper? Obviously, you can then do it after, as a creative afterthought. Obviously, the director can always say, for dramatic purposes, we should do this. Or for dramatic purposes, we could exaggerate that. And that's fine. I love that that's how you should do it. But this is really a glimpse of what's to come, I think, with AI and machine learning. We already see it a bit on Foundry and Nuke, and we already see it a bit on Flame, and this is really the things to come. I feel like we're going to reach to a point where all these physics-based gravity systems are all automated. And, okay, you live on a sandbox and you try things just like you would have done on a real sandbox. And this is going to leave so much more time to do better staging on shots, and it's going to leave so much more time to do better creations of shots and better stories. I feel like this is a fascinating thing. I love the fact that they've developed this AI tool that originally, and they developed, of course, probably thinking they were going to use it for something else, but then they actually used it on this car. And yeah, I love it. I think this is the way to go. And this is the way we should take these tools. And again, for everyone listening, because people get scared a lot about AI. Oh, I'm going to lose my job. You're not going to lose your job. This is just going to help your job. Because instead of you having to spend hours and hours trying to make a suspension look like it's real, no, it's already done. And then you can spend your hours doing something else on the shot. I think people need to start realizing that AI is part of this business, and you just need to embrace it and then become a better artist with it. I feel like this is the practical of it. This is an actual proof of that. We've seen that before, even on Vetta's work with Junior on using AI as well, on Will Smith as well. So AI's tools are here to stay, and all the artists that work with them love them. So don't be scared of them. Just embrace them.
Framestore also worked on the part of the sequence where they go into that forest. And I feel like this is my favorite bit of Framestore's work in a way, because once again, they could shoot some amazing stuff. It's kind of a bit of a scary sequence because we're seeing whether Safin, the baddie, is around. And ultimately a big defender gets flipped. And, here there's some Moco plates involved so that they can do a flip, but also do a CG one and put an actor in there. But one of the interesting things is Framestore had to kind of come up with the scenario of why this thing would flip. And Jonathan was telling me this story of him walking around the woods, taking photos of big root systems or buttresses or, big logs and or tree trunks. And that being actually, from his iPhone, actually being part of the sequence. And I think, we don't talk about that too much because these sequences are heavily planned, prevised, art department, production designer, stunts, special effects are involved on set, and often VFX comes later. But of course, some sequences are totally solved by VFX when they have to reimagine things or come up with a solution. So I loved, the part of Framestore that solved this for the film and made a story point, which I thought was really cool.
It is, yeah.
Hugo, the last thing we're going to talk about is Safin's Island.
Yeah.
A huge sequence with lots in it. Mostly a combination here of work by DNeg and ILM. I would say ILM did interior parts to this sequence. There's this whole plot about Safin making some kind of chemical, biological weapon, and he has some people inside these bunkers making that. ILM did a lot of extensions there. They even did motion control for some performers that are in there but also fall down. They did a few explosion things. They did quite a lot actually, and it's some really great work. DNeg did more of the external shots and the final, I guess it would be, and here's a big spoiler alert, some final explosion work, which was actually taking on some of Chris Corbold's major explosion work, which actually, is the biggest explosion ever done, again on Salisbury Plain. So, once again, combining things. What did you think about this sequence overall? There's a lot going on in it, isn't there?
It is, yeah. Well, you already mentioned spoilers, but I'm just going to mention it again. If someone listening to this hasn't watched the film, you probably want to pause this and watch the film and then come back to this, because we're going to spoil the film for you. So, or maybe not, but we will probably spoil parts of it, at least, I think. No, this is even before I talk about the visual effects, I think this entire sequence is really, I don't think I've seen this on a James Bond movie where it's very epic, as usual on the ends of James Bond, but it has a very poetic side of it, of course, because you have him, James Bond, Bond is fighting to the, he's getting hit, getting bullets, getting fought, he's all broken up. It's it's a huge fight all to the end, until really the very end, where he, spoiler alert, he ends up dying on this film, which I find that this is really courageous from the director and also from the team that created James Bond to actually kill him on a film. I was not expecting that. I fortunately was not spoiled this film before I watched it. And I thought from a poetic point of view, from a storyline point of view, that was the best thing they could have ever done to the arc of this character, to finish the 4 or 5, I think it's 5 films he's done, I think, to finish this story of this character and also to open it up to new characters like we've seen with the other 007 that we have on the film. So I think that testament to the screenwriters, because they had a lot of guts to do this, because I don't think this would have I don't think a few years ago this would have been done, like killing him off like this. But yeah, it's epic. Again, I'm just watching the story. I don't even see much and think much about it. There's so much going on. They did film a lot of sets. They did, there was a huge build. They had a huge build of the style. Yeah, the interior where not the sub. It looks like a submarine, but when the glider glides into the water, to this huge area that looks like where a lot of submarines are parked. That area, of course, they did build quite a lot of it, which looks really beautiful from the production design.
Actually,
but then a gigantic, massive thing on the back of CG.
I didn't even mention the glider, but that's a DNeg sequence, and possibly, Hugo, that's the only super extravagant visual effects shot or sequence of shots in the film. But by then, we're so invested in them getting into the island that I was totally buying it, that it goes through the clouds and then skims across the water and under the water. I mean, it actually felt like a real James Bond moment,
It did, yeah.
Which is the point.
I also don't feel like I maybe it's because, like you said, maybe it's because I was engrossed by the story, but I felt it was very grounded, even though it was a flyover with clouds and everything, and it's full CG. The whole thing is full CG. But it was very well shot, especially because they had these really cool POV shots of them inside the glider, which they could cut into when we see the reaction of them. Of course, they had them done in full CG as well to replace them. But especially when the glider comes out of the plane, because they're inside the glider and the camera is with them, and then it goes out of it. So I think they did all these things right to kind of let the suspense and disbelief go away, and then you can watch these parts and then you go back to reality. This happens all the time on the film, I think, and it's fascinating. But yeah, going back to this set, beautiful augmentation. There's augmentations all over the place here. You have the gigantic interior arches that were all augmented in CG on the background, adding to the build that was there. The same thing with the pools, with the water as well. The same thing with the vials, with the deadly creations inside the containers. The whole thing is just covered and covered and covered. The full CG augmentations on the background, augmenting and completely merged into the set, which must have been a really difficult and very high-scale thing to actually capture for CG, because they had to take photos of all of this. They had to take textures of all of this, HDRs of all of this, references of all of this. There was an enormous crew of capturing all of this data that they had from the sets, which is shout out to them, because I know you mentioned them on one of your articles on their Instagram page. Top of my head, I can't remember their name, the team, but they did an amazing job capturing all of the data that needed for this to work,
Yeah. I think it's another invisible effects sequence that's magnificent to watch. I am going to call out one shot in the sequence which actually I think is really great visual effects, but I'm also going to say I reckon it didn't quite feel part of the film. Some people might have loved it. Were you aware, Hugo, of that one-er that happens as Bond is going up the stairs, I think to try and close or open, these silo doors? And basically he's taking out a lot of bad guys. It took me a little bit, but I realized at one point that's a one-er, probably stitched together from multiple takes. And I don't know which visual effects studio was behind it. For some reason, it took me out of the film just a little bit, because I was thinking, does this need to be a one-er? Usually I'm obsessed with them. Carey has done them before in True Detective, I think, and elsewhere, but it was probably the only shot in the film that took me out just a little bit.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I know what you mean. I know what you mean, because nothing else on the film is like that, and so there's no moments on the film where you have one single shots or sequences, and yeah, I can understand that completely. But I guess maybe it's a signature, and he likes them, and probably it could be that. I would say that for me personally, that entire sequence, the only thing, it looked flawless, but the only thing I really didn't like, and this is one of the reasons why I don't really like James Bond that much, because it's a bit too nutty for me. It's the thing with the eye, like the eye exploding and the mechanical eye.
Okay.
I just find these kind of villains just silly and a bit 70s and 80s, and I just feel them a bit like over the top with the mechanical eye, and then explodes, and then come on. So I felt like that thing was a bit too much for me, but it looks flawless. It looks stunning. I have nothing to say about the visual effects from that, So
I think people cheered in my screening in Sydney, so that's the whole point, isn't it?
I know.
Bond. People who love Bond love.
I'm not a
stuff.
fan, so I would not be the guy to I look at that. I feel like when I was young, I think James Bond was ruined because of Austin Powers. I think Austin Powers ruined James Bond for me because I started laughing at these kind of villains and these kind of things because of Austin Power. I think that's what happened. But
one thing that I kind of enjoyed, again, it's a bit Bondy for you, Hugo, is I think they call it a QDAR, which was kind of this, like a LiDAR representation of the silos.
Yeah.
Based on something Q could give them like this device. And I thought that hologrammy QDAR thing was a fun Bond evolution, and because in visual effects we know so much about LiDAR and photogrammetry scans now, it was a little bit meta, and I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah,
you want to talk about that? There was one thing that I was really shocked about when I read your article and your interview. Yeah. I had no idea. Maybe you want to talk a bit about this. I had no idea they would have done mocap for this, and that was a fascinating part.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, this is ILM for those, the workers inside that huge hall, and they're in the water sometimes, or they're walking on railings, and yes, they get thrown off railings and stuff like that. I mean, if they don't shoot it as a stunt, what else are you going to do? Animate these people?
I didn't even thought about it because, I thought maybe they shot it for real and they had someone there. But it's amazing. They went and shot a lot on mocap for this. And
as I understand it, I mean, ILM has a great stage in its San Francisco studio, possibly elsewhere as well. And they really have some mocap experts that have been there since the days of The Mummy and... Jar Jar as well. And I think they've been on a bit of a roll with background actors and mocap. Actually, there's a TV series called The Stand, which had some great balcony mocap being done for characters. So, maybe it makes sense that they've got the resources and they know how to make it look good, and the behaviors and the mocap there were seamless, just like all of their visual effects were in the whole sequence in the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about the final explosions, Hugo? I thought, as you say, that was an emotional moment.
It was. I
wasn't milked. It
No.
wasn't really milked much.
No.
It's a POV, a Bond. There's a wide shot of the explosions, but there's more of a POV.
Yeah.
Or right up close to him as it happens.
Yeah. Even I that don't really care much about James Bond, even I was invested on that sequence. So it's a testament to the direction. Because even though I don't really care much about James Bond and I didn't really watch much of the movies before, I was scared by, and I think it has to do with the fact, of course, Daniel Craig is an amazing actor, and also we've talked about this offline about the acting from Léa Seydoux. I think that's how we pronounce her name. It's French name, so I can probably mispronouncing it. But her acting on this film is really good, and she's very good. She's always been very good on all the films she's on, and it really helps to cement this scene. The entire thing, really, their connection and their relationship is amazing, isn't it? I thought that she really brought like a different level to this film, and I really would recommend everyone, for those of you that play video games that are watching this, you really should go and play probably my favorite video game of the last 10 years. I think it's the best video game of the generation. It's a video game called Death Stranding, made by Kojima, which is a very famous game director that created Metal Gear Solid back in the day. And she's one of the main actresses of this game, and she's stunning on that game as well. She's probably the best acting of the entire game, and it's also it's funny that she's called Fragile on the game, and she's also very fragile on the character, and also she's here on this film as well. She's stunning, and really go and play that game. It's just for the acting, and the game is long, but it's worth it. It's once in a generation video game, really, and she's a very big part of that. But yeah, don't you agree that that's why that sequence works? Because of her and because of him and that entire...
Yes, it totally works. Yeah. I don't know which island she's on her CB radio talking to him on. I mean, geographically, spatially, I missed the point of that. But I think it's a very emotional sequence and really well done. And yeah, I mean, what a way to finish Daniel Craig's part of the franchise. Visual effects is a huge part of all of those films, but to be such a big part of that final emotional moment, must have been tricky for the team, A, to do, and B, to keep synchronous for like 1.5 extra years, right, Hugo?
I know.
Because it was delayed.
It was. I remember watching the posters on the subway just before the pandemic. It was all hit. It was all gonna be like out there then, and then it got postponed, and then it got postponed again. So they had to do the marketing 3 times, and it's just like, I can't believe this was a secret. How is that possible?
Yeah, I think even some of the cinematography magazines and possibly even VFX ones, they do early interviews to come out at the same time as the film. They actually did publish, their story about the film a year early, which I thought was fascinating, and it meant that I had to hold off reading these stories because I didn't want to be spoiled. But yeah, awesome. Well, as we always do, Hugo, we've missed a whole bunch of shots in the film. We're sorry to all those artists, but I think we talked about the main things, and I think, as you keep mentioning, the general theme is this seamlessness of it all.
It is, and it worked out. It worked out for them, like the because they could have sold it to a streaming giant, and they could have released it earlier, but they hold off and they kept it, and then they put it on the cinema. Worked out for them. The film ended up doing very well on the box office, and it was a critical darling as well. Everyone really loved it, I think. I think everyone generally thinks it's probably one of the best James Bonds. I think. You probably feel like that, don't you? Like, because you really like James Bond. I don't know. What's your favorite James? Let me ask you that then. What's your favorite James Bond movie?
It is actually Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig one.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
There's something about it which it's a really good script, and you're meeting this character, and
that villain. Oh my God, that villain. He's amazing. Oh, by the way, the villain, the actor that plays the villain in Casino Royale, he's also on that Stranding on the game.
Oh, right. Wow.
He's also amazing on that game. No, that villain, I think, is one of the best villains ever on a film, not even James Bond. Yeah. He's just stunning.
Yeah. But Skyfall is also brilliant because we see a bit... This is the one I don't think you watched, Hugo.
I watched a bit and then I kind of dozed off. For me, Skyfall is a bit like Home Alone. I didn't really enjoy it. I don't know. Like
Hugo, it's Roger Deakins who shot it. I mean, come on.
That's fine. I don't like the new Blade Runner either, so it's like, it's fine.
Oh my God.
It's fine. No, Roger Deakins is amazing. It doesn't, of course, the film is beautifully shot, of course. No, I don't know. I think this is like an old thing with me. I just get turned out when... That's why I like Casino Royale. Casino Royale doesn't have any of these silly villains, doesn't have any of these silly set pieces. It's just the guy with a shirt, and it's just like, it's really so grounded that it makes me believe that the film exists. And some of the other films, when you start having too many gadgets and too many cue moments
Sure.
and too many things, it just turns me out. And it's like the only moment on this film, No Time to Die, that I really didn't like. It's just like when he has the little machine guns on the car with the little button. He just presses button and things happens. It's like, come on, you don't need to have this stuff. Come on. I don't like these little gadgety things. It's Inspector Gadget moment. I don't really. I think it's. I just feel it's a bit silly.
They didn't make this film for you. They didn't make this film for you. I'm sorry. Look,
no, but
I
see it's Casino Royale. I guess like we both agree. Then it's our favorite James Bond. You see,
very watchable. Well, Hugo, I think it's been really fun talking about the visual effects of this film. I'm stunned to learn about your opinion on Bond films, but that's okay. It's a film. That's the whole point. We can have opinions. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you to our sponsors and to our Patreon supporters. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Hugo. I really enjoyed chatting about it with you.
Cool. Excellent. Well.
All right. We've only got one more thing to do, right, Hugo?
Yes.
See you later, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.